Morning, folks. So this morning we speak on the subject of thatch roof structures or thatch roof fire protection in general. I think it's a subject that concerns, of course, the construction industry, and the homeowner and the insurer more than anyone else. It's a subject that is not, as far as I know and I'm aware of, it's a subject that has not been discussed widely in any number of years. It's almost as if we shy away from the subject. And so I want to touch on a couple of issues, and as per normal, it takes me a few minutes to find my feet in a new discussion. So it sounds like I'm running away with myself. It's because I'm running away with myself. And so there's very little information in the National Building Regulations concerning specifically thatch roof buildings. And so we can start with the simple structures like LAPAs and maybe just give it a bit of thought. So a LAPA, if a LAPA is under 20 square meters, that's taken from the edge to the edge of the roof. If the LAPA is under 20 meters, and if it is more than 1 meter away from the boundary wall, you're not compelled to submit building plans. It is, however, always a good idea to submit building plans, especially when it comes to reselling of a property. It's a good idea to have that already on the plans, otherwise it might cause a little bit of an upheave when you want to re-register a property. So under 20 meters, 1 meter from a boundary wall, no problem. If it's closer than 1 meter to the boundary wall, the plans have to be submitted so that the fire department can have commentary before the building control officer will even consider it. If it's larger than 20 square meters, it must be 4.5 meters away from the boundary wall. And plans must be submitted, whether it's closer or further than 4.5 meters from the boundary wall. So if it's larger than 20 meters, what sometimes happens is that people submit it as a LAPA and then soon they turn it into cottage or a bedroom or a under another category of the building regulation, occupancy category. And so there's always that danger that it's easier to submit it as a LAPA than it would be to submit it as a residential unit. But there are dragons there. So one should be careful. So when you consider whether your client complies, these are very basic rules. Now there's the question of lightning conductors, which I want to address now already, and I'll speak about it again later. There is no fire department that would say that it is that would compel the homeowner to put up a lightning conductor, because there's nothing in the building regulations that you can use to compel such a requirement or to enforce it. Obviously, it's an oversight in the building regulation, and obviously it's a good idea to have a lightning conductor if the structure is larger than 20 square meters. Why do I say larger than 20 square meters? So the cost of erecting a LAPA smaller than 20 squares is almost equal to the cost of a lightning conductor. So the homeowner should take a decision already that if the LAPA does burn, I'll just have it burn out, because the cost of protecting it is simply too high. But at the same time, when you go larger than 20 square meters, it's a brilliant idea to erect a lightning conductor and to get somebody that is competently qualified and certified to firstly design the conductor that's required, and secondly then to erect it. Okay, so I'm going to come back to lightning conductors when we're talking about the larger structures. So when we get to the larger structures, it's as far as firefighting is concerned, I would say we would almost prefer fighting a fire in a thatch than fighting a fire in a tiled roof structure. And the reason for that is that the grass simply burns out and it disappears in the open sky. So the chances of the fire falling to the floor is almost zero to begin with. So the thatch burns out and it disappears with the smoke. An equal fire in a tiled roof structure will bring the fire to the floor rather quickly, which means that the vertical fire spread is quick, from which point on then horizontal fire spread is also quick. But in a thatch roof, what we find mostly, if it's a competent fire team that attacks the fire in a thatch roof, they would get on the roof and they would control the fire rather simply and rather easily by determining where precisely the fire is in the roof and then attacking it by inserting nozzles into the thatch and so on. They would also cut a fire break and have that drop to the floor. A thatch roof, in a sense, is almost the same as a veld fire on walls. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's really what it boils down to. What makes it difficult to fight a fire in a thatch is the fact that it's very difficult to move on the thatch roof and to stabilize staff or workers or firefighters on the roof. So there's a difficulty in that. Okay, so let's address a few points on the structural issues. So it's very difficult to identify from the national building regulations what the requirements are for blue gum poles resting on a wall. In some instances, you find that the contractor will build a large lapa, so to speak, of 200 or 300 square meters, and then building up between the blue gum poles, the erect poles or the supporting poles, which means that the roof is not carried by the wall, but it's carried by vertical poles. And so that the walls are not load-bearing, but they are simply there for temperature control or for aesthetics or other reasons, but it's not load-bearing then. And so it's a kind of a structure that requires far more and far more detailed attention from an engineer in the design of it than it does from an architect. And even if an architect should do the design, it is definitely a good idea to check the load-bearing components with an engineer. As I already said, the roof, when it burns and if it burns under control, it will just burn out. And most of the timber work or the blue gum poles will still be sitting there and can almost just be cleaned up and reused under certain circumstances. If the fire had gotten out of hand and the fire had moved on from being a cold fire to a hot fire, some of the intermediate blue gum structure may be damaged beyond repair, and of course it then has to be replaced as well. Mostly, if you look at a structure that has burned and the roof has disappeared in thin air and the fire was under control, although the whole roof burnt out, but the fire was under control, so it was kept cool, you can mostly use most of the structure as it stands there, walls and the roof structure included. Now, it used to be that around about the turn of the century, the thatch contractors started using twine to bind down the thatch instead of wire. So let's say up till about the middle 90s, they used to use press wire, and a large percentage of roofs today still have press wire in it that they used for the binding. Now, the problem with that is that if lightning strikes that roof, the entire bundle of binding is now an element that transfers heat and conducts heat. So if you look at a fire from a distance, if you look at a roof structure from a distance and the lightning strikes it, and there's no lightning conductor, then you can almost see the roof almost exploding, so to speak, because the thatch generates its own methane gas. So the binding, I just want to sort the binding out quickly. The binding, if you look at if you consider a structure, consider that as well, the mode of binding. Then what we also have is that they normally pack 50 millimeters of Kaapse-Dekriet for the lower packing, so that you have, aesthetically, it looks really nice from the underside of it. It's greenish, and it remains greenish for many, many, many years. Probably beyond 15 years, you can still see the green Cape Reed. And then on top of that, they pack about 6 inches or 150 millimeter of high-veld grass, which is less durable and which needs more maintenance attendance. And then the ridge sometimes is done with a glass fiber capping. Sometimes they use concrete or cement for the capping. And in some instances, they first put down budgie wire, and then they put the capping on. In some instances, in lodges, they put budgie wire over the entire roof. Now, you can imagine that if the press wire was a problem, if that became an element with a lightning strike, then so much more the budgie, what would they call it? Budgie draad, yeah. You know what I'm talking about. It's got an aggregate opening of about 12.5 millimeters. And they normally put it down for baboons and monkeys that destroy roofs in the Lowveld, for instance. It happens mostly. And so in every one of those instances, the wire element becomes an element. The wire component becomes an element with a lightning strike. And so we get to the lightning conductor. Once again, it's difficult to define or to identify in the building regulations that a lightning conductor is a compelled item. But then, if we do use if we do install a lightning conductor, then of course there is an SABS code for lightning conduction. It should be designed and installed by competent people. If the conductor is fitted too close to the thatch, the conductor may actually set the thatch on fire. So what happens is that you've got a flame running around the conductor, and that flame is approximately 800 millimeters in diameter, and all of that energy running down to earth may set the thatch afire. And so it mustn't be too close to the thatch, and for that reason it has to be designed by a competent person. Now, the earthing of it, of course, goes together with the design, and that must be left once again to the competent person. You cannot expect of or allow the building contractor to take its own decisions as to how and where a lightning conductor should be placed. Conductors normally cover about 30 degrees down in the various directions, and so sometimes you require 2 or 3 conductors to make sure that the entire roof is covered. So how do most of these fires start in thatches? So up till just the other day, and I think I mentioned it when I spoke about lithium and solar panels, up till just the other day, fires didn't start in roofs, except in thatch roofs. But on a roof, you never had a fire that started. And now we have thatch, and we have thatch. We've had it all along, and so we've got fires that start in thatch, and mostly it's electrical, or then lightning. Electrical is when a poor electrical installation has been done. It sparks in the thatch, and I've already said, and let's say it again, the thatch generates its own methane gas, and the methane gas is sitting in a hollow reed, and it's easy to ignite it with a spark. And once it's been ignited, the fire spread is rather rapid, because the reed is hollow, and so it's already sitting at an angle of 45 degrees down to 30 degrees, depending on who designed the roof. And it being at that angle, it means that the fire spread is almost vertical, and it is rather rapid. It's a fire that is difficult to detect with detectors. The smoke sort of crawls or hides in the reed, and if you have a detector underneath that, in what we would call almost the roof void, under the roof, it takes some smoke to activate such a detector. So it's not as easy as it is in a ceiling void, for instance, to detect smoke, or in a conventional room. And so the fire spread is rather treacherous. You don't really know where the fire sits until you start opening the thatch. We often find people that design their own fireplaces and their own chimneys, and then of course the fire starts in that little area around the chimney. And sometimes when they call us and we respond, they call again and say, "No, we've extinguished the fire. You can stand down." But that's not the truth, and so we never ever stand down. We always send out at least one crew to make sure, because the fire will be sitting in the reeds and you won't see it from the bottom of the building. And so, as I say, it's rather treacherous. I think that's the best description there can be for it. So tackling a thatch roof fire it requires a lot of manpower. It is labor intensive. The thatch has to be pulled and dropped to the ground, and even that thatch has to be controlled so that you don't have fire spread on the ground, which makes it even worse. And so back at the protection of a roof. So in many instances, the fire department even will have a requirement, and the insurers have the same requirement mostly, that say that the thatch must be protected with a layer of fire retardant spray. I prepared a document, a questionnaire for the Thatching Association of South Africa, and I can forward the correspondence or maybe the response from the Thatching Association. That was maybe around about 2018, Monique, if you'll just remind me of that. I'll forward you the correspondence where the Thatching Association distanced themselves from any of these products and from any of the procedures. And now, so what I'm saying here is it's a difficult discussion because, well, of course, I'll get a lot of flack for what I'm saying here, but let's trust that I'm able to to shield off the criticism. So I prepared for SAISA, the South African Insurance Association, SAIA. I prepared the document for them at the time because this matter always comes up when an assessment is done, and when we look at the documentation where the insurer put their requirements. And I don't This is not a criticism on the insurer, because the insurer has very little else to require, because it's not a matter that has been thoroughly trodden through at the SABS, and so it's a slippery slope that I'm going on now. And so there are products, or there is probably one product that is mostly used, and the manufacturer of that product also does not franchise the product or the application. They do it themselves. So one of the things that I have discussed with the Thatching Association was the questions I have about the application of the product or products include, for instance, the following. So who submitted for thorough testing the products to the SABS or to other certifying bodies? And now that it's certified, what precisely are the application doctrines around it? The application of the product itself, how deep must it penetrate, for instance? Are we doing the underside and above and over? Yes, and the answer is yes, we do. How deep does it penetrate? And they'll give you the penetration depth depending on who the manufacturer is. And then my questions are, and who certify the applicators, the people that do the work, and how often are they certified, and how often are they recertified? And there's approximately 40 questions that I think that need to be answered and that have to be discussed in depth. And I venture that those questions are some of the reasons that the Thatching Association distances itself from these products. And you'll say to me, but my uncle in Uppington has a product, and the building has never caught fire with that on it. And I'm happy to listen to those stories, but it doesn't help us in a general sense. And so these questions have to be answered. So one of the issues, for instance, is that you have to reapply the product after 7 years. Okay, and you've also got to brush and stump the top layers every 8 years or so. So after the brushing, of course, the flame retardant has to be applied again, and it has to be certified again, and so on. So one of the issues, again, one of the questions is the certification. The company that certifies it, is it ISO 9000 SANAS accredited or not? And if it's not, then by what international authority does it certify? It's obvious that nobody can just certify something. So until that question is properly answered, we don't really know. And so now we're looking at simultaneously at the issue of, and it's a new fashion, is to cover the thatch with either corrugated sheets, zinc plata, or with steel tiles. And these things are approximately 2 meters long. And I don't want to name any trade names here, because it opens a can of worms if I do. But you know precisely what I'm talking about. And so now you're covering this roof, and a question to the insurers whenever I talk to them is, if the high-felt grass now starts rotting after 12 or 15 years because you're not maintaining it, and you can't really see it, so you don't know it, because you've got tiles on the outside and you have the Cape Reed on the inside, which you maintained. Well, not maintained, you kept the Cape Reed for aesthetic reasons. So now the reed starts rotting because there's no maintenance on it. If you have to remove the corrugated sheets or the steel tiles, or whatever cover it is that you've put over the thatch, who's responsible for the costs of this exercise now? Is it the homeowner or the insurer? And so it's not even a fire issue yet. I'm coming to the fire issue. It's not even a fire issue yet. So you can take a material and you can apply a blowtorch to it and say, see, it doesn't burn, which is fair. It's steel. But that's not how the thatch roof burns. The thatch roof doesn't will burn underneath the steel cover. And so if the lightning strikes the roof, we have the same challenges that we have with an open or a conventional thatch roof. And so the question needs to be answered by somebody. The question needs to be addressed by somebody. And if you have to reapply the fire retardant every 7 or 8 years, it's possible to do the underside of the roof, in other words, inside the house. But how do you now retreat the high felt grass that's over the roof? Because it's now covered by tiles or zinc, corrugated zinc. And I just had an interruption here. And just get back. And so now we get into fire. If a lightning strikes or the fire starts with an electrical short in the roof, as it normally does, in a conventional roof, we can determine the position of the fire or the location rather easily. But if it's now covered, we just don't know where the fire is. And so the smoke will be emitting throughout the structure. It'll just come out wherever it finds a little opening now. And so my theory is that the methane gas that's been generated in the grass sits in that pocket between the thatch roof and the covered material, or the cover material. And now we have a fire spread that is over whole full sections of the roof. And so one of the ways that we tackle that fire is that we attach a steel hook at the top of the roof, and we use a winch and we pull the entire section of that roof off. But the moment you do it, you expose it to oxygen and you have a flame show over that entire section of the roof. So now you need about 3 or 4 firefighters on the roof with lines ready, with water ready, so that when you pull it, you can at least conduct a primary attack until you know what's happening and what's going on. So my finding has been, and that's my lived experience, and so we deal with, I would say, about 20 to 25 thatch roof fires in a year, of which a small percentage so far are covered. But now you have to uncover the entire roof, and it means that the insurer loses sometimes a whole roof instead of a section of the roof, because you just really don't know where the fire is, even if it looks like it's been extinguished. But as long as there's a little bit of smoke emitting, you have to pull those roof sections off as well. Now, mostly the contractor will install new branding, and they will drive a nail that looks like a 400 millimeter or 500 millimeter nail through the new branding, through the thatch, through the isolation, into the blue gum pole. And so nobody knows really how much damage is done to the isolation that's between the thatch and the grass and the Cape reed. So you don't know how much damage has been done there. But most of all, you have added to the conduction element, in that not only do you have a lightning strike that can have a direct strike on the roof and set the building of alight, you also have these spikes that run through the thatch, and all of it add, because they're not earthed, and so if the spike is an element for the lightning strike, then of course it adds to the fire danger. So what I've said so far, I think, is quite a bleak picture. I was rather happy or rather satisfied as a fire officer and a firefighter when we only had to fight fires in conventional structures. At the moment we added the covering, it's a totally different story. It's not even equal to a conventional house with a zinc roof, because there you have a ceiling void and ceilings in it, and so it's a different story altogether. So now we also add to this dilemma. We're going inside the house now, and some of the rooms, maybe some bathrooms and maybe the bedroom where the girls asleep, we put a ceiling in it so we don't see the thatch at all, because we don't want the spiders and the hojas to drop down from the roof on into the girls' room. And so when you respray the roof now after 7 years, how do you deal with that section of the roof? And so you can see that we're just adding to the dilemma as we proceed, as we progress. And so those are the basic issues that I wanted to discuss this morning. I think the information is of value for both the homeowner and the insurer. We have seen insurers taking fire off the policies in some of the outlying areas where you have lodges and so on, which are large risks. And you can add as much water and hose reels around the building as you would like to. It doesn't guarantee that you will be able to put that fire out in time. It's a fire that is treacherous in itself. It hides in the reed. It's fed by the methane gas, and it's difficult to reach it. Even if you're trained and even if you have the equipment to reach it, it's a difficult fire to fight. It's a rather difficult structure to protect with smoke detection, as I said earlier. You could probably look at heat detection that will pick up heat, but whatever it is that you do, the system has to comply with SANS 10139, so that you are sure that you get certification for the detection. And I would suggest that whatever the residential size is, if it's a house or a lodge, whatever the size is, that you get competent people to give you advice on the protection of the entire roof, preferably before the construction is done. And so I will ask Monique to forward you the response I had from the Thatching Association that time. I think it was around 2018 or so. I prepared the document for SAHIA, and I'll forward you that document as well, so that you can see what the questions look like. And of course, I am open to debate on any of these points, because none of these things that I've said now is an absolute point. I'm not qualified to make absolute statements. I don't know of anybody in fire protection environment that can make absolute statements. And so the point can be debated, and you could most probably come up with really good arguments, and I would gladly have a discussion about it if need be. I think we can now address the questions. So let's look at the questions, if any. What? Oh, yeah. Can I start with Clive? Clive says, hello, Clive. Long time no hear. May you please comment on the placement of steel tiles? I will not mention the name there, product name. Steel tiles on top of thatch. I have heard this results in a methane buildup, which is dangerous and a risk. I think I have sufficiently covered the point now, Clive. As I said, I do not use trade names. I have had cease and desist legal letters in this regard. So I would not, I would stay away from that. But you know what I'm talking about. There's also corrugated steel sheets that they put on the roofs. Richard Mpepu says, do we need a membrane under thatched roof? I assume that by membrane you are referring to the isolation or isolation. It's always a good idea, Richard, to have it there for two purposes. The one is that it does offer a temporary shield between the two layers in case of a fire, but it's also a very good isolation temperature control mode. So for those reasons, I would put it there, yes. Mike says, are external fixed sprinkler systems of any use? I've heard about the topic, and I've seen some homemade so-called systems, Mike. I think it has value in, if you think of what happened in California, it was a good example of flying embers. So that when you have a veld fire or mostly a wildfire, it's not the same thing. If you have a wildfire approaching the property, you can open the system and wet down the roof so that if you have flying embers, at least you mitigate that. The one challenge that you have is that if you make it steel pipe, then the steel also becomes a lightning conduction element. If you make it a plastic pipe, you've got limitations in that you have to keep it filled with water. Otherwise, the plastic pipe may burn. So it must be a wet system from the start. It can't be a dry system that you only open in the event of a fire. The challenge also is that the water will just run off the roof like off a duck's back. The water will not penetrate, especially if it's been treated. It won't penetrate. And so there's, I think, very little value in it. There's no certified systems that I can think of that you can even visit the literature on. So it will at best be a best practice thought or a best practice application. And I can't think of anybody that will certify it so that it will satisfy the insurer as a mitigation factor. Another one from, do we need, Richard, Mike. Okay, then a question from Clive again. Yes, you did, thanks. Jonathan Williams says, would using RLF4 foam be a recommended firefighting attack? My previous statement is also true for foam. And it's the foam will also be running off the roof. To a degree, it will stick to the roof. So there's a little value in that. But the thing is that you need to apply copious amounts of water to try and penetrate the roof. And so that will just wash the foam off again. What I would suggest, however, is we at Fire Ops, and I think it's common knowledge now, we attend to, on average, 2 building fires per day, and we use wetting agents in our water, which adds a lot to the effectiveness of the water. Some of the literature says it's about 600% effectiveness you add. And so a wetting agent will help with the absorption, and it's a surfactant, so it breaks the surface tension. So if you can insert that under pressure, but under pressure with your water, that will definitely add, and that is what we also use during our firefighters. David Engelbrecht, hello Chief, he says the majority of insurance industry are no longer insuring thatch roofs. That's absolutely true. We find it now. What alternatives are available to mitigate the risk in order for insurance to rethink thatch risk? Well, I think it's a major topic that you're addressing here, Chief. I would first say that if you have to have a fire response team that can professionally attack the fire. You can't play with a thatch roof fire because, as I said earlier, you really don't know where the fire is. You can't waste time. Every minute counts. And so if you're in a footprint area where there is a private service, then I would say engage that service on a standby basis, the way that we do commercially. And I would also suggest that if you have, for instance, a lodge that you have to protect, that you not only have hose reels at the ready, but that you also consider ultra high pressure equipment, so that you can actually force water in under ultra high pressure conditions. And by ultra high, I mean between 90 and 170 bar pressure. Now, just to bring it in, to relate it, a street hydrant, if it's a good hydrant, as we call it, it'll operate at about 6 to 7 bar. That's a really, really good hydrant. Now I'm talking about 120, 170 bar, 90 bar pressure here. And I would suggest that if you have a lodge, that you have this equipment readily available. So how does it help us installing a hose reel? It can be used for a primary attack, and it probably will be used successfully if you can do it in the incipient stage of the fire. That is within the first few minutes of the fire. Beyond that, the hose reel will be of little value because the water won't penetrate the reed. Also, if you're in a municipal area such as the Greater Johannesburg area, where there is no water in the street main, when you open your domestic tap, if you flush a toilet and there's no water, then it also means that the hose reel also has no water. So to depend on that is a little bit dangerous. I could also have said you should have a garden hose at the ready, but it's the same thing. If there's no water, there's no water. We then have to look at alternatives for adding water to the equation. And in many instances, and because it's not a requirement of the fire department that a residential property must have fire tanks, I would say that we should look at something like a fair size JoJo tank, such as 10,000 liters of water, with an outlet that can be connected to the fire department vehicles and so on. But once again, get professional opinion on it and deal with it ad hoc. Don't take what I say here as the last word on it. So, Chief, I hope that I have, in some sense, answered your question. I should also say that there's very little value in having a fire extinguisher at the ready for a thatch. Firstly, the roof is high, and secondly, the powder will make such a mess in the environment that you won't be able to see in a few moments after you used it, and it will have very little effect if the fire is deep-seated in the thatch. Desmond says, insurers' hands have been tied by the reinsurers worldwide. This being the reason why we are all walking away from these, especially game farms away from proper fire brigades, very selective. Clients generally struggling to place insurance, even some using the pump in swimming pool. However, fire training also not in place. Excuse me. Desmond, it's such a moot point. It is so that the insurers walk away from it because of the reinsurers in mostly Europe having their own requirements. And I must say I have a lot of empathy for the reinsurers and the insurers on that side. So let's just cover for them for a little moment. The risk is extremely high in that in terms of asset loss. In terms of life loss, for instance, it's not that high because it's easier to rescue people from a thatch roof structure that's on fire than it is from a tiled roof fire, for instance. But the insurer has an interest in the asset. And so the reinsurers, one of the reasons they're nervous about South Africa or Africa then is that our climate conditions and our temperatures and our general conditions and the nature of the grass that we use is absolutely unlike anything that is even remotely available in Europe or England. In America, I don't even think they use reed. And in the UK, Margaret Thatcher's name comes from somebody in her, some forefather that was a Thatcher, and they knew him as Mr. the Thatcher, and so Margaret became Margaret Thatcher, and so on. So, but they use a very heavy reed in the UK, and it's not remotely the same as what we have. Also, our climatic conditions are far worse and far different from what is in Europe and in England. And so, of course, it makes the reinsurers nervous. And then we're looking at structures. I mean, there's a structure in Kempton Park, for instance. And I don't want to give out too much information about it, because then you'll know what I'm talking about. But that structure is probably in excess of 2,000 square meters. And to begin with, there are not even lightning conductors on their premises. And so, of course, an insurer will walk away from it. And I think swimming pools are excellent backups for firefighting water. We have the brilliant and professional opinion of Mr. Zuma on that as well. And we quite gladly take water from a swimming pool when we fight fires. So when we respond to a house fire, that's one of our water supplies. We drop a submersible pump in a swimming pool and draw the water. But you have to have a fair-sized pump for it. It's not expensive, but a fair-sized pump for it. And it must be on a generator if it's electrical. Otherwise, we trip the utilities when we get to a building fire. And so the generator must then feed whatever little pump you've got there. So yes, it requires training, Desmond, just as it requires training of a family to make sure that they can actually exit their dwelling in the event of a fire. But I mean, that's a general topic. What are your views from a fire perspective on synthetic thatch, HDPE or other synthetics? The National Building Regulations give us 3 ways of complying or of satisfying the requirement for fire protection. The one is that you can comply with the regulations as they stand. The other one is you can have a rational design by an engineer that is registered with EXA. And the third one is the important one here with this topic. And that is that you can go to Agrement. It's spelled like the same as agreement, but with 1 E at the end. And an Andre thingy, what is that called? So that's an emphasis on the second E, Agrement. It's a French agency, but it has agency in South Africa in the CSIR. And so you can take a product such as this now to Agrement and have it tested. And the beauty of it is they don't just test the product in the way that the SABS would test the product. Agrement also tests the application of the product. So if I say to Agrement, this brick can't burn, then they say, okay, but prove to us, where are you going to use it? And I'm going to say, I'll use it in this, that, and that application. They'll then certify that for that application only. And so if you want to use synthetic tiles, then you have to, or synthetic thatch, then you have to take your product to a body such as Agrement. And in this country, it's only Agrement that's mentioned in the building regulation. And it's an expensive exercise. We've been through it recently with colleagues of ours, and it took in this instance years and millions of rands of testing and proving and testing and proving and having it underwritten by other engineers, fire engineers, and before it was approved in our instance. And I assume that the same sort of energy would go into this product. So if the product carries a certificate from Agrement, then that's the baseline. Then I can't even comment beyond that. But in the absence of that, I would say it's rather more dangerous than a thatch fire. With thatch, we know precisely what we're dealing with. With the synthetics, we don't know yet. And so I should rather refrain than try and have a professional opinion. But in my mind, it's going to be more difficult to fight that fire. What are your views? Okay, so is this the last question? Oh, so that's the last question. Okay. Oh, brilliant. Is there anybody else that want to ask a question that can still get it in? Okay, then we've got our next webinar is when? The end of October.
Yes.
And what is the topic there? What is it? Oh, firefighting water provision, and there's a teaser line that says the onus has shifted from municipal responsibility to that of the building owner. So that's what I'm talking about. At the end of October, the invitations will still be sent out with a date. Water provision, firefighting water provision, the onus has shifted from the council to the building owner. 29th of October it will be, says Monique. So that will be sent out, and this webinar, this will be sent out the third week from now. Yes. So that you have it on record. So that's just before the next one. Oh, there's Cindy says, always very informative. Thank you, Cindy. You're my next best friend now. Thank you, folks, for listening. My name is Wynand Engelbrecht. You can contact me at FireOps SA if you want us to assist you with first response assistance or with consultations. There's another question comes out from Lawrence Botha. Thank you. As a small holding owner with an old thatch home, this is a costly headache. I agree with you. I can only imagine. The vet says, the vet Engelbrecht, will the insurer be satisfied with an assessment from FireOps SA? I assume, Chief, that any professional assessment report adds to the satisfaction or the pacifying of the insurer. The insurer is nervous. And so if a professional report is delivered on such an construction, I assume that the insurer will at least look kindly on it. And it's something, to your point, it's something that can only be done ad hoc. I can't sit here and give pointers and hope that somebody will make a summary and say to the insurer, I comply with what Wynand dealt with in a webinar. So I assume that the insurer will at least look kindly on such a report, Chief. Nothing else? Thank you, folks. Have a lovely day, and may God bless you. Cheers.